I want to really have the audience understand the process this goes through, starting with even this idea of like, well, who is the donor? Where do you start with even finding the person that is quote unquote healthy?
Yeah. So we, and to be really clear, and I'll say this over and over again, Thaena is not fecal transplant, but
Right.
I'll build the connection of how they're related now. So we were working in fecal transplant. We had spent a lot of time and energy thinking about what made a person healthy. And obviously, as this entered the US kind of conventional healthcare system, the most important thing and the place everybody started was infectious disease risk. Because the reason we don't like poop is because fecal oral transmission of disease is real, and the germ theory and you know all of the work of industrialization really taught us to think poop is associated with disease, which is true sometimes, but there's 58 pathogenic bacteria and some bad viruses, but overall the microbes in our gut are actually commensal. And we had to overcome that ick factor, and the broader medical community was addressing it like we would approach a blood banking system. And so actually the early days of screening were based on blood banking, because we can't synthesize blood either, and I think that's a good comparison. And so the thing that we saw the need for was to move beyond, yes, screen for infectious disease and everything that we can possibly think of, but then ask people about their diets, define health on a further registry, which we as practitioners think about a lot, is, well, do you have a mindfulness practice? What is your exercise? What does your mental health look like? There's so much beyond just your whether or not you have infectious disease. So we really focused on cultivating and building off of work done by others, including Carmen Campbell and Mark Davis, who came before us, to say, okay, well, were you vaginally born? Were you breastfed? Do you have less than 5 antibiotic rounds in your lifetime? Do you have things that both, serum and stool, so we know don't have any infectious disease, but also does your microbiome represent diversity and health in the best we can define it? And the reality is that's constantly changing. So we had these healthy people, healthy poopers, unicorn poopers, and then had their poop, but we wanted to move beyond FMT to something that was more accessible. And one of the early concepts was that, what if the bacteria don't have to be alive to matter? And this was kind of revolutionary in 2017, but makes sense now that we know with the concept of postbiotics is here. We know you can
Mhm.
pasteurize probiotics and they're still effective. And in the case of Akkermansia, sometimes more effective in certain contexts. So we looked at that. We looked at the infectious disease risk and said, well, what if we just went all the way and completely sterilize the stool in an autoclave? And that's like what you use to sterilize medical equipment before surgery. It kills viruses and bacteria, and it's dead. And then we went even another step further and used pH to make sure things are degraded. And we shift the pH really high and then back down, and filter and kind of focus on looking at the postbiotic molecules that we think are most important, recognizing that this is super complex ecosystem. So there is still a lot there we don't understand. But to be frank, I didn't know if this was going to work or not. And when my first set of patients said this was really helping them, I said, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Who would have thought autoclave poop would have any impact, even at a low level? So that's how we ended up with Thaena. And this was in, 2019. And since then, we have kind of built this brand around the concept of a super postbiotic derived from whole human stool, which represents a more complex postbiotic mixture than you can get from like a cultured version of a probiotic.
Let me start by saying you definitely have to find those unicorn poopers if it's 5 rounds of antibiotics or less. I feel like
Yeah.
most children go through 5 rounds of antibiotics in a year these days, right?
Yeah.
So that's you're raising the bar, which is great, because I do believe, especially when you're talking about the microbiome, things like those nuke bombs of antibiotics are very difficult to bounce back from even in a lifetime. So that's great. You have that truly healthy sample to start with.